Welcome back to America's Fractured Politics. Today I want to talk about something that might sound out of place given everything we're living through right now. I want to talk about optimism. Not the shallow kind, not the performative kind, not the kind that pretends everything is fine when it clearly is not. I'm talking about something harder, something more grounded, something that has to be chosen with full awareness of the danger in front of us. What I'm talking about is justified optimism. And here is the core of it. We are going to survive Donald Trump. Now, let me be very clear about what I do not mean. I do not mean the threat is exaggerated. It isn't. The threat is real. It is ongoing. It is structural. It is not just about one man's personality or his rhetoric. It is about the way power is being used and reshaped, the way institutions are being tested, bent, and in some cases broken. I do not mean our institutions are holding strong. They are not. We have seen too many failures, too many moments where people who were supposed to act chose not to act, where guardrails we assumed were permanent turned out to be optional. And I do not mean that history guarantees a happy ending. History does not work that way. There is no invisible hand guiding democracy safely through crisis. There are countries that fall into authoritarianism and do not come back for generations, if ever. So no, this is not optimism rooted in denial. This is optimism rooted in people. America will survive Trump because millions of Americans have not surrendered themselves to his efforts toward domination. That is a reality he cannot overcome. That is a variable he cannot control. Trump's political project depends on something very specific. It depends on diminishing people, on making them feel small, isolated, and powerless. Judges are attacked so the public will distrust the law. Journalists are attacked so the public will distrust the truth. Immigrants are targeted so the public will accept cruelty as policy. Prosecutors are smeared so accountability feels illegitimate. Teachers are intimidated so education becomes propaganda. Civil servants are purged so expertise is replaced by loyalty. Election workers are threatened so democracy itself feels dangerous to participate in. And dissenters, voters, ordinary citizens, anyone who resists, is made to feel like they are alone. None of this is accidental. The cruelty is not a byproduct. The chaos is not a glitch. The spectacle is not random. It is the strategy. Because if you can exhaust a country, if you can flood it with so much noise, so much outrage, so much confusion that people stop paying attention, stop believing, stop resisting, then you do not need to win everyone over. You just need enough people to give up. But exhaustion is not the same thing as defeat. That distinction matters more than anything right now. A tired people can still be a free people. A frightened people can still become a brave people. A country under sustained pressure can still remember what it stands for. And that is what we are seeing even now, even in the middle of all of this. There is a narrative being pushed, sometimes subtly, sometimes aggressively, that democracy is already over, that the outcome is inevitable, that resistance is symbolic at best and pointless at worst. That narrative is not analysis. It is persuasion. It is an attempt to sell despair. Because despair is politically useful. If people believe the system is already lost, they stop trying to save it. They disengage. They withdraw. They normalize what should never be normalized. And they fail to vote. But Trump is not the end of the American story. He is something else. He is a revelation. He is what happens when corruption goes unpunished long enough that it becomes normalized. He is what happens when propaganda ecosystems grow so powerful that truth becomes optional. He is what happens when racism is repackaged as patriotism and sold to millions of people as identity. He is what happens when cowardice among political elites is rebranded as loyalty. He is the result of decades of erosion, not an anomaly that appeared out of nowhere. But he is not destiny. He is not the future unless we decide he is. And that decision, despite everything, still belongs to us. For all of his noise, for all of his dominance of the media environment, for all of the spectacle that surrounds him, Trump has never really understood the deepest source of American strength. It is not the presidency. It is not the symbols of power. It is not the rallies, the branding, the flags, the donors, or the theatrics. The strength of this country has always been something quieter and far more stubborn. It is the refusal of ordinary people to be ruled like subjects. It is the election worker who shows up even after receiving threats. It is the judge who signs an order knowing it will make them a target. It is a teacher who tells the truth in a climate that punishes honesty. It is the journalist who keeps digging when the cost of doing so keeps rising. It is a protester who shows up not because it is convenient, but because it is necessary. It is the neighbor who helps the family being targeted. It's the voter who stands in line after being told the line is too long, the process is too complicated, or the outcome is already decided. That is America too. In fact, that is the America that has saved itself every time it has been tested. And we are being tested again. There is no point in pretending otherwise. This will be painful. It already has been. People have been harmed. Norms have been shattered. Lies have been normalized to a degree that would have been unthinkable not that long ago. Institutions have been bent, and in some cases they have broken. And the world is watching. The United States, a country that spent decades positioning itself as a global advocate for democracy, now looks to many observers like a place flirting with authoritarian rule. That damage is real. It will take time to repair. But there is another truth that is just as important. Nations, like people, can go through shattering experiences and come out of them stronger, not automatically, not inevitably, but because they are finally forced to confront realities they have long avoided. The America that emerges from this period will not be innocent, and that is not a loss. In many ways, innocence was never what we thought it was. It was often a form of denial, a willingness to ignore uncomfortable truths about power, inequality, and the fragility of democratic norms. We do not need an innocent America. We need a wiser one, a country that is less naive about authoritarianism, less naive about white nationalism, less naive about disinformation and how quickly it can reshape public perception, less naive about the cowardice of elites who will abandon democratic principles when it becomes politically or personally inconvenient, less naive about how quickly people who call themselves patriots will trade the Constitution for power. Trump has forced these lessons into the open. He has shown, in stark terms, that democracy does not defend itself. We defend it. He has shown that laws are only as strong as the people willing to enforce them. That courts matter only if judges are willing to uphold the law in the face of pressure. That norms are meaningless if there are no consequences for violating. He has shown that rights, voting rights, civil rights, reproductive rights, press freedom, academic freedom, are not permanent fixtures. They exist because people fight to maintain them. And perhaps most important, he has shown that the peaceful transfer of power, something many Americans once saw as automatic, is actually one of the most fragile achievements in any democracy. These are painful lessons, but they are also powerful ones, because a democracy that understands its own vulnerability has a chance to become harder to break. That is the opportunity inside this crisis, not a return to normal. Normal failed. Normal created the conditions that made Trump possible. It tolerated corruption. It downplayed extremism. It rewarded spectacle over substance. It treated democratic stability as if it were guaranteed. We cannot go back to that. We need something better. We need stronger guardrails. We need broader participation. We need real accountability, not just rhetoric, not just investigations that go nowhere, but actual consequences for abuses of power. We need citizens who understand that freedom is not something you inherit once and keep forever. It is something you practice daily, collectively, with intention. This is where the hope comes from, not from pretending everything is fine, not from assuming someone else will fix it, not from believing that the system will correct itself without effort. Trump has power, that is undeniable, but he does not have inevitability. He has followers, but he does not have the entire country. He has intimidation, but he does not have moral authority. He has access to the machinery of government, but he does not own the American people. And that distinction between power and ownership, between control and consent, is everything. Every authoritarian movement relies on the same psychological mechanism. It tries to convince people that resistance is futile. It tries to isolate individuals so they feel alone in their opposition. It tries to create the impression that everyone else has already given in. Because once people believe that, the system sustains itself. But that is not where we are, and it does not have to be where we end up. Resistance does not begin as a mass movement. It begins in smaller, quieter ways. It begins when people stop asking whether speaking up is comfortable and start asking whether it is necessary. And right now it is necessary. We survived Trump not through a single dramatic moment, but through sustained effort. We survive by refusing numbness. We survive by protecting elections, by volunteering, by monitoring, by insisting on transparency, and by voting. We survive by defending vulnerable communities who are being targeted for political gain. We survive by telling the truth, even when the truth is inconvenient or unpopular. We survive by building local power, school boards, city councils, state legislatures, because that is where so much of this fight is actually happening. We survive by supporting independent journalism in an environment where disinformation is profitable and truth is under attack. We survive by participating, serving as poll workers, joining organizations, funding legal challenges, voting in every race, not just the high-profile ones. And we survive by refusing to let exhaustion turn into obedience, because that is the goal of the chaos, to make people so tired that compliance feels easier than the resistance. But history gives us some perspective here. This country has endured civil war. It has endured violent segregation enforced by law. It has endured moments where fascist sympathies were not fringe, but influential. It has endured corrupt presidents, political violence, assassinations, and constitutional crises. It has endured movements that tried to redefine we the people so narrowly that it excluded the majority of the population. And again, the worst actors in American life have made the same mistake. They have confused cruelty with inevitability. They have assumed that because they could impose their will in the short term, they had secured the future. And again they have been wrong. Not because history corrected itself, but because people did. Because enough individuals decided that the cost of resistance was worth paying. Trump wants an America that kneels. Our answer has to be an America that stands. Trump wants citizens to become spectators, to watch politics as something distant, something controlled by others, something they have no real influence over. Our answer has to be citizens who act, who participate, who engage, who refuse to be sidelined. Trump wants the future to belong to fear. Our answer has to be that the future belongs to those who are willing to build it, even in difficult conditions. America will survive Trump because the American idea is bigger than him. It is older than him, and it is stronger than the small, fearful vision of power that he represents. It will survive because millions of people still understand the difference between a president and a king. It will survive because the Constitution, even in its current battered state, still provides tools if we are willing to use them. It will survive because courts, however imperfect, still matter. Because elections, however threatened, still matter. Because speech still matters. Because protest still matters. Because organizing still matters. Because solidarity still matters. Because courage still matters. And most of all, it will survive because people who believe in democracy are beginning to understand something essential. Love of country is not a feeling. It is a responsibility. It is something you do. If we do the work, if we absorb the lessons of this moment instead of trying to forget them, if we refuse to look away when it becomes uncomfortable, if we stay engaged even when it becomes exhausting, then this period will not define us in the way many fear it will. America will not merely survive Trump. It will emerge from this period harder to fool, harder to silence, harder to break, and far more determined to become what it has always claimed to be, but has never fully achieved. A democracy not just in name, but in practice. A system not just defended by tradition, but by people who understand what is at stake. That is the optimism. Not that everything will be okay on its own, but that enough people are still willing to make sure that it is. This has been America's Fractured Politics. Remember to hope and remember to participate. We will win this battle.